Alright, welcome back to Rome. It's me, and in Chapter 4, we are going to climb the political ladder with our boy Marius. As you may recall from our last episode, he's just been elected consul for the year 107 BC, but he was also elected for 106. So he has 2 years in this top office. But that doesn't mean it's smooth sailing ahead. He still has to get through those elections, and he's gonna have some stiff competition. Let's jump in with our man Marius. Now he is able to secure his first consulship in large part, because he is able to pay the election expenses for his supporters. But that doesn't mean he's flush with cash. In fact, he's pretty much living paycheck to paycheck here, funding his campaigns by borrowing money from rich Romans. Which means, once he's in office, he's got to do right by them or else they won't support him again. At the same time, though he can't ignore the expectations of the people, who want him to be just as tough on the Samaritans as he was on the Teutones. And so, how does he square that circle? Well, by promising both groups a big show, he sets out to build roads, aqueducts, temples, and other public works, all of which require lots of manpower and material. And he's going to need allies to get these projects rolling. So, where does he turn to? Well, 2 men who might seem like odd bedfellows. Gaius Gracchus and Lucius Appuleius Saturninus. Let's talk about them one at a time. First, there's Gaius. Remember him? Crazy, radical land reformer who tried to take over the government in 133 BC, but was assassinated before he could do anything. Well, he has a brother named Lucius, and he's looking to make Marius' new land reform program a reality. Not the audacious kind that Gaius was proposing, but if Gaius wanted to tear down the old system, Lucius wants to tweak it and fix the parts that are broken. He's a lot more moderate than his brother, but no less determined, and he sees Marius as the perfect ally to get things done. The problem is, Lucius is a former consul, which means he's a senator. And Marius, well, he's not. He's a new man, a self-made man, but he's not part of the ruling class. And that makes working together a bit tricky because it turns out that senators don't really like working with non-senators. They think they're better than them, and sure, in most cases, they probably are. But sometimes their noses get so far up their own behinds that they forget the good work that the non-senators are doing. And that's what happened with Lucius. He decided to look past the snobbery and endorse Marius anyway. It was a controversial decision, but it paid off. The two worked together to pass laws redistributing public land to poor citizens and veterans of the social war. They created new colonies in Italy and reformed the courts. Lucius helped set up a legal defense fund for Italians who couldn't afford lawyers. He pushed for restrictions on slavery, too, and did his best to make life better for everyone in Rome. Unfortunately, he would not live to see the results of his efforts. He died midway through Marius' first consulship, but his death paved the way for even greater things. And it brings us to our next ally, Appuleius Saturninus, the last of our 3, and in many ways the most important. You see, Appuleius comes from a family of former slaves who were freed by the first consul, Lucius Cornelius Sulla. Now, you may remember him as the bad guy from our episode about the First Mithridatic War. But back in 100 BC, he was a rising star in Roman politics, ambitious and ruthless, willing to do whatever it took to get ahead, which is why when he hears about Marius' plan to build roads and aqueducts and all those other infrastructure projects, he sees an opportunity. Here's a guy who wants to get things done, a guy who needs allies, and I know just how to help him. Now, you might be thinking, wait, didn't Marius just borrow money from rich Romans to fund his campaigns? Yeah, he did. And Appuleius is one of those creditors. But here's the thing. Appuleius isn't just lending Marius money out of the goodness of his heart. No, he wants something in return, and he wants it in writing. In fact, he demands a written contract guaranteeing him lucrative government jobs, road construction jobs, basically anything that will line his own pockets. And Marius agrees. The terms of their deal vary depending on the source, but according to Plutarch, it goes like this. Appuleius will give Marius 100 talents of silver, about $2 million today, for the lictor, which is the governor of one of Rome's provinces, and the governorship of a colony. So not exactly a great deal. But Marius is already deep in debt. He's desperate for help. And besides, he's got 2 years as consul. He thinks he can get away with it. And sure enough, he gets the votes he needs to start his building projects. And then he appoints Apuleius to the coveted post of Curator Aquarum, which oversees Rome's water supply. That's the theory. Anyway, in practice, it doesn't go quite as smoothly. And there are two reasons for that. The first is that Apuleius is already neat in a scandal involving the Vestal Virgins, the priestesses of Vesta, the goddess of the hearth. If you want to know more about that, I've got a whole video on it. Just click right here. But the long story short is that Apuleius is trying to keep his distance from any controversy. So he asks his friend Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus to replace him as Curator Aquarum. Now, you may know Magnus as Pompey the Great. He's famous, too. But back in 107 BC, he's a young man without much experience in government. And sure enough, the job is a little too much for him. And here's why. See, it turns out that some of the water channels in Rome are blocked, and that means no water for bathing, drinking, or flushing toilets. That's a pretty big deal in ancient Rome. And it has not gone na make Marius. Very popular with the voters if he doesn't fix it. And the only way to clear the aqueducts is with a gang of slaves who have only been paid in months. Now, normally, you can just threaten to whip them into shape. But they've all banded together and they say they won't work unless they get their wages. Pompey doesn't know what to do, and that's when Marius steps in and solves the whole problem by bribing the slaves instead. He pays them, the aqueduct gets cleared, and order is restored to Roman life. But while that's a big win for Marius, his other choice for lictor doesn't work out nearly as well. You see, the lictor's job is to collect taxes for Rome, and Marius chooses a senator named Gaius Marius to do the job for him. But Cyrus has some funny ideas about collecting taxes. For example, he likes to take a cut for himself. He squeezes the people he's supposed to be helping, and when that gets around, people get pretty mad. Then he starts extorting wealthy landowners in the countryside, demanding protection money from them. And when that fails, he starts arresting people and accusing them of crimes against the state. So yeah, unsurprisingly, people get pretty mad about that, too. And eventually the Senate grows so tired of Cicero's shenanigans that they tell Marius he has to pick someone else. To make a long story short, none of Marius's handpicked candidates can actually do the job, so he ends up sending none other than Lucius Cornelius Sulla. And now here's where things get really interesting. See, Marius had no idea he was appointing Sulla to be his deputy. But Sulla takes full advantage of the situation. He collects taxes efficiently and dutifully sends the money back to Rome. Then he goes back to the city with the rest of the Roman army after the social war ends. He stays out of politics for a while, keeping a low profile, saving his money, making valuable contacts and waiting for his chance to strike. So that's what happens in Marius's first consulship. His building projects start out strong but lose momentum due to infighting. His deputies fail him. The only bright spot is the end of the social war. He marches into Athens to a hero's welcome and helps negotiate the peace treaty with the Italian allies. He returns to Rome to the cheers of the populace, and all in all, he's got a pretty successful first year as consul. But the second year, well, that's when things get really exciting. So stay tuned until next week to find out what happens. When we come back, we're going to talk about Catiline's conspiracy and Cicero's famous speech against him. But if you want to get a head start on that, I've got another channel where I read and discuss classical works of literature. We just started Catiline, and if you want to join us, all you have to do is click right here and subscribe. In the meantime, I'm going to keep working on getting our audiobooks finished. So if you want to hear more about the history of Rome, all you have to do is click right here and become a member. Members get access to our exclusive content, including our audiobook series, where I read primary sources about Roman history. This month, we're reading Augustine's City of God, and we just finished book 1. And we've got tons more content coming your way, so don't miss out. Join our membership today. I'll see you next week.